don't fall off. So I'd like to introduce Andrew Barnett, who's the CEO of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, who funded this piece of work, and I invited him just to talk a little bit about growth and replication and why they thought it was important. So I'm going to hand over to you, Andrew. Thanks.
Thanks, and sorry for my lateness. Best laid plans and all of that. Anybody who works in the arts will know that all sorts of things can go wrong, but you're all very good at pulling it off at the last minute. I am less so. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and indeed for hosting this series of events over a period of days, both in person and online. Hybridity is I think the new thing, but it's good to be here, and it's particularly good to be here because Battersea Arts Centre has, I think, been in the vanguard of what I would mean by taking a civic role, and it has an exemplary programme of work, the agency, which typifies the sorts of things that arts organisations can do, and they've crossed the Rubicon by sort of finding out what was particular about it and bottling the source so others can use it. And that is the sort of topic of this afternoon's discussion. Growing and replicating was one of the barriers that emerged when the Foundation began its inquiry into the civic role of arts organisations longer ago than I care to remember, although I think it was 2016, 2017. And the barriers that the leaders we interviewed when we were thinking about this were around leadership in governance, around the language and how one described work that is co-created and or plays to a civic role, about partnerships. Many of you work in partnerships, but there is always a complication when people who work in one sector need to work in others. Every sector I've ever come across invents its own vernacular, largely, as far as I can tell, for the purposes of ensuring that nobody other than an exclusive group is able to understand what they're talking about. So language is an issue. Funding models is an issue, and I'll say something about that and how it relates to the growing and replication issue. And growth and replication were was the final thing. So let me begin by saying something about scale, because there's an implication when one talks about growth and replication. It's all about scale. And actually, I'm not a big fan of things at scale, necessarily. Certain things are, it's good to have an economy of scale, so prices come down and all the rest of it, but big is not great for its own sake. And there are countless examples, either in government, business, or in the voluntary sector, where organisations actually get too big, become remote from the people whom they are serving, and end up, if you like, warehousing people. And so it's not about scale. What it is about is spreading. Spreading the good, enabling others to replicate it, to adapt it to their own context, and to avoid reinventing wheels. And that's what's happened with the agency. Conceived in 2012 and now spread across a number of different localities across England with funding. And funding's important. Let me just sort of refresh a bit. So why we did the Civic Role Inquiry in the first place. I'm going to say what some of the conclusions are. It came from a desire to get away from this age-old debate about the arts having an intrinsic or an instrumental value. Now, I imagine, actually, you don't look as if you would want to spend all week talking about that, but many, many people have opined on this for many, many hours, and I'm not going to do so today. I think it's a rabbit hole. The reality is the arts hold multiple values for all of us, and it can do one thing can have an amazingly transformational impact on the life of an individual experiencing a particular challenge, or it can raise the tide. It can do all sorts of things, and certainly when it comes to things like agents for change, that was intended to have some specific outcomes, to engage younger people who were not engaged with Battersea Arts Centre before, to give them opportunities for employment, to release their creative juices, which each of them held manifestly. Anybody who's disappeared to play the board game will know that. So it did have some intentions behind it. And once you get into the realm of having programmes of work like the agency, and wanting to maximise the benefits of it, you get drawn into how do you sort of codify it? How do you codify it, and how do you spread it? It's happening too with, if you like, social prescribing, where you can point to a health benefit from a particular artistic intervention. One needs to substantiate the evidence behind that, and one would want the intervention to be as widely taken up as possible if it were proven to be effective. So we're in this sort of realm, and so the intrinsic versus the instrumental was a dead-end argument I wanted to get out of. The other was an anxiety which which lingered over me for quite a long time. I mean, in the 1970s, the Kalous Gulbenkian Foundation had published a seminal book by Nassim Khan called The Culture That, The Art That Britain Ignores. And it was probably the first authoritative contribution on the importance of diversity in the creative sector. I mean, the fact that it's taken us decades to come back to it is in itself something to bear in mind. But I was sort of informed by that, and knowing that at the time, the terminology we used was really about access and participation. It didn't work for me, because a sort of parody of that is, if only people had enough of it, they would love it. It's a sort of push mentality, that all we need to do is give people who are not coming to the arts, and let's remember, there are only 8% of the population who at any one time are enjoying artistic experiences which are subsidised through their own taxes. It's basically saying what we need to do is shove more of this in their direction, and they will love it. The money that's gone into doing that just hasn't worked. And my reading of that is both because increasingly people want to be engaged to a greater extent in the experiences that they have, and that's why immersive theatre, co-design, and other things have become more popular. But it was also the whole thing about us as a human race is that we're able to tell stories, and it's not much good if the stories that are told by the people who are past our taxes are telling stories which don't resonate with people in their real lives. So access and participation on whose terms? So that was the other sort of conclusion that it was just gnawed away at me. So when we launched what was an inquiry, and it was positioned as an inquiry with intent, because I don't know that the answers are either necessarily obvious or easy, but actually asking the question enabled us to both come up with some of the issues that whole debate encapsulated. So we discovered, for instance, that there's sort of three versions of arts organisation, and no one does only one, but quite a lot veer towards one end. So there's sort of version one, which is, just put it on and they'll love it. Version two is the sort of access and participation bit, which is, they'll love it, but we need to go out and get them in. And again, that in a sense gives the lie to those organisations who see their access and participation work as about attracting people into a building, whereas actually what they do out there in communities is of equal validity. And so it's not, version 3 is something that's co-designed, and I know that's very much the sort of subject of these of this series of days. Definition proved elusive, but metaphor was resonated. So if we think of arts organisations playing roles as metaphorically colleges, places of learning, or perhaps parks, where anybody who goes to a park will realise that what you get is a cross-section of people from a society mingling completely at ease with each other, or generally speaking, and doing precisely what they want. So sort of there's a sense of agency you get in a park. You can pootle around on your own, but you're part of a cross-section of your neighbourhood. So that's arts organisations as one of those sorts of places, and I think the way that this building has been set up to bring people in plays to that notion. And the other one was as town halls, and it's interesting that this building was formerly a town hall. Similarly, Shoreditch Town Hall is, as it says on the tin. And I was actually inspired by another town hall, which is Finsbury Town Hall in Islington, no longer a town hall, in which the building was constructed with the council chamber on one side and a dance hall on the other. And the Prime Minister at the time, Lord Rosebery, opened it and said that he hoped that this would become a network of organisations across the country where art and recreation were combined with local decision-making. It's an interesting concept, but in today's society, increasingly polarised, people feeling remote from decisions which are made about them, the idea that creativity and creative organisations can in some way be a conduit, either for resolving difficult issues on which we may not agree, or indeed informing public decisions, seem to be a reasonable thing. And I know increasingly, there are arts organisations that put on, shows that address very sensitively some, quite difficult issues that we have in society. They make us think about these things. They give us nuance, and they navigate the subtle differences. People come at this from a whole range of different backgrounds, different motivations. And we produce a list of case studies of organisations that we felt to be exemplary. It's how we've managed to develop a programme of work addressing those barriers, so leadership and governance. This sort of stuff needs to be at the heart of an organisation, not on the fringe. I've seen so many organisations that run time-limited projects on the side. They're the barnacles, not the vessel. And activity which truly puts the communities that an organisation serves at the heart of their thinking about decision-making, at the heart of their purpose, are more likely to be civic in their nature. So governance and leadership are really important. People who can navigate those silos. If you can speak local authority speak, and I believe there's a vernacular within town halls as well, then you're likely to be able to succeed. I know, for instance, that the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester has got a partnership going with the local health trust. So, learning to speak health, another vernacular, is really important. Partnerships, and we've sought to work with people in a different way, less transactional, more about what each organisation can bring to something that they couldn't do themselves. New funding models. I mean, this is a perennial problem where funders fund projects. If ever you intended a project to be a time-limited barnacle, you fund an organisation on a project basis. But this stuff needs to, if it's to be core to an organisation, they should be funded as though this activity were core. And finally, the issue of growth and replication. And I'm going shamelessly to plagiarise from a paper that I asked the Young Foundation to produce a long time ago. And I'll just outline, really, why this is difficult. And there are some sort of headlines here. First of all, never underestimate people's desire to reinvent wheels. There's an issue of fidelity. I suspect that quite a lot of us have sort of got quite uptight when it comes to, the specifications of a particular body of work. The reality is, if you want something to spread, you need to be less controlling about what happens with it, and you can have tiers. You can do all sorts of things around that, but things need to be adapted to local circumstances. So you need to boil it down to, it's a bit like a recipe. There are certain things you need to include in whatever it is. Let's say it's bolognese, you need to put in tomatoes and garlic. But I mean, if you put a Mars bar in there, it's just like, no, it's not going to work. So there's key things you can do, and things you shouldn't do, and then people can perfectly easily reinvent the wheel based on received wisdom. So obsessive fidelity is a barrier. Funding, again, it rarely rewards innovation. It often rewards innovation on a localized basis, but very few organizations explicitly target proven methodologies that can be taken to scale. And so what it means is that we're all reinventing our own wheels because the money isn't there for it. There's also an optimism bias, and I mean, you'll probably feel this yourself. The things we feel pleased about, we think everybody else will be pleased about. And certainly funders are always a little bit skeptical about that, because we all like our own thing. And one needs to be a bit more objective about what it is about a particular body of work, like the agency or anything else. What's the objective evidence as to its effectiveness, and what are the features which make it good as opposed to not? Some organisations also are not very open to new ideas. It's a sort of it's the flip of the not invented here syndrome. So the idea that you might do something that was developed by somebody else is always a bit difficult with organisations, and sometimes organisations are also a bit precious about their own idea. I mean, it's always the case, isn't it, that success has many parents, but failure has none. People can be precious about the whole thing, and I'm of the view that replication is the sincerest form of flattery, and we should all be a bit more generous in allowing people to steal our ideas and take them on, and even claim them for themselves. And the final one is the rewards. It's back to that whole thing that, if a good idea takes off, then the originator is soon forgotten. Don't worry about it. I mean, it is, as I say, if people run away with your idea, it's great. So the agency is a really good example of where a sort of concept has the scope to take off even more. I mean, I was thinking on the way of other examples, and I suppose the Bolivar Orchestra is another, and there will be, I believe there's one at the Lowry. There's a particular program which works with young people who have just left care. It's completely replicable by any arts organisation working with a local authority. So there are a whole range of things that, barriers that need to be overcome, but growing and replicating is one of the things we need to get over, and it means that it requires different skills to be able to identify the features, more rigorous analysis of the activity, but the end result will be more time to spend on, with the people who we serve, delivering the good things that things like the agency and other examples coming from Battersea Arts Centre can afford.
Thank you. The Lowry are here, so if you wanted to talk to them about their Young Carers project, they're over there. I'll hand that back to you. Thank you.
Is this, yep, we're on. Great, thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate that, and actually you've cut my job in half, which I really appreciate now, actually. So thank you. We'll simplify it though, guys. So don't worry. Thank you so much for inviting us here today. My name is Ajit Jugnut. I'm the Innovation and Investment Program Manager at Young Foundation. Fancy title, I'll try and explain it if I can really well. But in this session, we will be sharing what we mean by growth and replication, and you've already heard a little bit from Andrew there on what that might mean for the sector here in particular. And I will also share what we did as part of the programme of support for the 5 growth commissions that you can see on stage. Although apologies from Theatre Royal Plymouth, who sadly couldn't get the train up to join us, but they were also part of our cohort. And then we'll be leading into a panel discussion where actually you'll hear from the guys who have joined me on the stage today about how that's actually resonating in the communities that they are serving. But before that, if I may, I'll just give you a brief introduction to the Young Foundation, and I'm going to be testing my multi-function skills here in trying to handle papers, microphone, and a clicker. But the Young Foundation, for those of you who are not aware of our work, our mission is to develop better, connected, and stronger communities across the UK. And by communities, we don't just mean in geographic locations, we also mean communities of shared characteristics, of experience as well. And we do this in a number of ways. Our approach is to understand, involve, and innovate. We are an accredited UK research institute and frequently conduct research across communities, themes, and sectors to platform the diversity of lived experience. It's okay, yeah. Don't want to do too formal with a podium there. As a community practitioner, we pioneer different methods and approaches to involving communities and developing their capacity to create change. And as a social innovator and investor, we take these insights to develop tools and resources and services to tackle the issues that people care about. In its existing form, the Young Foundation has been around since 2005. However, we have a long-standing history of supporting communities stretching back to the 1950s with the work of our namesake founder, Michael Young. He was the founder of the Institute for Community Studies, which is something that we just recently resurrected back in 2019. And our work of understanding, involving, and innovating for communities has helped incubate a wide variety of social impact projects and organisations that are still in existence today, from Which Magazine, the Open University, and the School for Social Entrepreneurs, just to name a few. So, building on our expertise in the area of scaling social impact, the Young Foundation were brought in to develop a programme of activity to support the 5 growth commissions that we'll be talking about. And I will also say that some of the language that we used, very much to address the point that Andrew just raised, we use that language, and it sometimes means so many different things for different sectors. So do forgive me if I might be not saying the right thing, but very much so we take the approach that the Gulbenkian Foundation spoke about just earlier in terms of when we talk about growth from scaling. So what do we actually mean by growth from replication? So I thought I would try and interpret this through some imagery, and I'm kicking myself. I didn't use a food analogy, given that I'm a home baker, and so I pray forgiveness for any green-fingered figures out here if I butcher any gardening metaphors, so forgive me. But yes, I'd like to try and convey this in 2 images, and the first one is with this, is the first image. With any social innovation, you start with a seed of an idea and the impact that you are trying to achieve. So very much like a seed, we might be having a plant, a flower, a tree. The process by which these initial sprouts of success emerge takes time, takes consideration, takes planning, and most importantly, motivation. So before seeing any results, but when you do, sprouts of success emerge, and that plant, flower, or tree of impact you are envisaging feels like it's a reality. However, to sustain this, we need to ensure the right conditions are in place for that impact to grow. So for our growth commissions, the sprouts that we were focusing on were their co-creation methodologies, practices that either already existed, were being developed or created at the time. And our goal, and that is, as the Young Foundation, was to help identify with each commission what core elements of growth there were and explore routes for sharing and replication. So that brings me on to my second image of what we mean by replication. In identifying those core elements of each of the Commission's co-creation methodologies and the aspects by which social impact is achieved, we wanted to explore where we can develop an offering for others, such as yourselves here in the room, to adopt so that the same impact can be replicated elsewhere. But we'll hear more about that from our panel in a minute. I won't go into too much detail onto this slide because this very much testifies to what Andrew was just sharing, and particularly in that point of fidelity. But in traditional forms of innovation programming, this is kind of the spectrum that we look at when we think about sharing and replication. So the middle section that you can see here with dissemination, affiliation, wholly owned, those are some forms of sharing that can take place. And that spectrum above, from flexibility to control, outlines very much the point that Andrew was making early on about how much control you release and what the originator of the idea may need to consider. Below, you will find that there are the forms of replication. So this can take in many forms, and they won't feel too alien to some of you. You're probably already doing it as we speak. But I think what you'll hear from our panel later on is how they've applied that in their work. So to share with you what we did, as some of you may know, the commissions were selected back in December 2020. We sat down with the great figures here in January to do a co-design session to really address the specifics of what people really wanted and what would be really useful for what they were trying to achieve. So reviewing individual plans, looking at more detail about what outputs people were proposing, and created a program that facilitated additional learning on that. And so we kicked off really with a series of monthly workshops, about 3 hours long. Thanks, guys, for bearing with me on that one. And again, managing multiple screens, disastrous workshop on one occasion. But we looked at a series of topics that were really, that resonated from across the cohort, that would have fulfilled everyone's needs. So we kicked things off with understanding impact. And again, for some of you who may be working in this field, you may be familiar with the theory of change. It's a great exercise to conduct if you are embedding social impact in the work that you're doing, by starting out with the vision that you are trying to create and trying to change, and working backwards in terms of what inputs, outputs you would wish to create. Attached to that is obviously great impact evaluating, and making sure that that is actually being achieved. And then at the heart of each of the commissions, there was engagement with communities, engagement with practitioners. And so we really wanted to bring our wealth of experience of being able to do that, as I mentioned at the start, of working with different communities, tactics, approaches, methodologies that we could provide to the cohort here to embed in their work that could help assist that and that further growth. Just from a practical sense, as I mentioned, we did 3-hour workshops on a monthly basis. In between that, there are exercises and templates. Again, thanks for your patience with the homework, guys. That we all facilitated via Google Classroom, which is a great platform to run these kind of sessions in a remote way. And the essence really to kind of help bring the cohort together to build a workbook in which these plans could be essentially published. So, what did we find out? An initial evaluation of the program highlighted 3 key aspects that are really important when considering growth and replication. And these were collaboration, how to think about collaboration with communities, with practitioners, other organizations from the sector when thinking about growth. There was peer learning, which was a key component to our workshops and our program of activity. But how do you embed that in as you grow and scale? And wider improvements to outcomes for others and the wider sector. So to delve deeper into that, I would like to invite our co-commissions. It's your time now, guys. And so I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Firstly, with Claire Reynolds, who's the co-artistic director of Restoke. We have David Tovey, creative producer of Arts and Homelessness International. I already sense that people know you. Yep. And apologies, we also have absences from the team who are behind We Can Make, but they've very quickly and hastily brought in a replacement in the brilliant Megan Bailey, who will be representing the team there. And also joining us is Eleanor Lauer, Creative Practice Coordinator of Rising Arts Agency, and Parang Kesri, who's also been one of the participants in their programme. I'll invite you guys to also share a bit more of exactly what you do when we kick things off. But thank you so much for your time and patience. I did all right there, didn't I? So thank you. We're going to just do a quick kind of panel, more focused about what we learnt from the programme. And I'm going to kick things off with Claire. Not just because you reminded me that this was going to be the first in-person session that I've done in like 2 years, so thanks for that. But also, she testifies brilliantly to the first point around collaboration and the work that you're doing at Restoke. So, Claire, if you can share with us your brilliant insights.
Yes, I will. I'll start by just introducing Restoke, which is an organisation based in Stoke-on-Trent. We make, yes, Stoke-on-Trent. There's a few of us here. We make performances and have done for 12 years that involve professional and non-professional performers and are around people's kind of collective experiences. So last year we kind of changed direction a little bit in that we decided to take on our own venue, and it's very exciting to be here because we've taken on a ballroom in a former town hall in Stoke-on-Trent. So I have real ceiling, like envy here. This is amazing. And we did all this during lockdown. We realized that we've always had an ambition to have our own space. It's always been a barrier to find spaces to bring people together to sing and dance and create performance. And this particular building had been used as a magistrates' courts for almost 60 years, and the ballroom was partitioned into magistrates' courts. So we raised the money to revert it back into a ballroom. So it's been a really nice journey to take that kind of civic building back from the Ministry of Justice to being a civic space and being a ballroom. And the building has a beautiful history around community activism and occupation, which I haven't got time to tell you all about, but come and ask me. So we applied for a Growth and Replication Commission to take our learning from how we co-create performances to how we co-create a community venue, a community arts venue specifically. So we spent time with Nicola Winstanley, who is a brilliant artist researcher and evaluator. And so the first thing we did is we really did a deep dive into what is our approach. Could we call it a methodology, whatever it is, but we realized there was a number of repeatable steps that we kind of went through to make shows that seemed to result in a real shared ownership and really kind of transformative effects. And so we do have a little draft copy of a bit of a toolkit that we've made with Nicola. So this is a draft copy, but that just really outlines our process and what we do and what we think is important and what we think the guiding principles behind that work are. And we are now applying that to the ballroom and to working with people there. And what we've really learned so far is that we are kind of undertaking such a long-term, massive thing. And you've talked about project organisations. Up until this point, we've been a project-based organisation. And we realise that although we don't think that we are product-based, we think we are very process-based. We're so used to having an end product. But now we've entered into this basically a really long-term, at least 10 years, which is our lease on the ballroom, contract with the local community. And we really have to look at how we co-create, how we apply those things that we know work when we're making a show, how we apply that to real, a long-term vision for Stoke-on-Trent and the people who live around that building and bringing them into that decision-making process. So yes. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, brilliantly. And in fact, that segues really nicely into Megan, because you are a recipient from the community of the project that We Can Make have produced. So we'd love to hear your experience on that. And if you can also share what We Can Make have actually done as well.
Yeah, sure. So obviously the director of We Can Make is not actually here today. So I am here instead of Melissa. Talking about co-creation and working in partnership, the project that I'm just about to talk to you about, I was actually a youth worker when I was involved with this project. And since then, now work full-time for Norwest Media Centre, who We Can Make is a part of. And yeah, that kind of helped the development as a personal kind of challenge for me. So yeah, I am a youth worker. I work with young people in Norwest, which is an estate in Bristol. I've come all the way from Bristol today. Don't know if I've got any followers. No.
Right here on the other side of the panel.
Oh, there we go. Hello, Bristol. Yeah, so basically the project that me and Melissa kind of worked on is based around these incredible blocks. They are made out of wood, and we build them at Norwest Media's factory, and essentially they're kind of like giant Lego blocks. They're about this high and this wide, and they're really light and easy to use. And we created a method using kind of digital and hands-on tools so that young people and all people can kind of design their own structures and build them in the communities. And these blocks have been used from building benches to building sheds to even building homes at the moment in Bristol. It's been absolutely incredible. But the example that I'm going to talk to you about today was a project which we call Making Together, where we got a group of young women aged between kind of 12 and 18, and I was their youth worker at the time. And I had a good relationship with the girls, but they didn't actually really know each other. and we kind of got them all together. They had no experience ever seen these blocks or using any of the tools. And we said to them, do you want some paid work experience? You know, you're going to get an hourly wage. I mean, at 12 years old, if you find out you're going to get an hourly wage, this is insane. And you're going to have this opportunity to be able to design and build these blocks and make something for your community. I don't know if they heard the end of my sentence, but they heard paid work and they were like, yeah, cool, I'm in. So luckily they were really eager to learn, and we kind of got the process working. So we allowed the young people to choose their own job titles, which was really fun. Like, there was kind of a few disagreements on who was going to be the leader, but we got there in the end. And yeah, they got to choose their job titles, and they signed a contract, and they just welcomed this like a full-on job opportunity. It was absolutely amazing. And yeah, like I said, the girls, they didn't actually know each other very well before we started this project, but what they soon realized is that being young women, all from the same estate in Norwest, they had a lot of common ground. And yeah, we kind of used Street Space, which was the youth centre, as the base of the project while we were designing stuff. And Street Space is essentially a windowless room, which these girls have got as their only shared space in the community that they live in. It's an incredible centre, but it's really, really simple. And these girls don't have any outdoor space which they have ownership of. There's very few parks, there are very few benches, and to be honest, a lot of young people in this area, if they want to hang out, they've got a couple of bus stops to choose between, and most of the time they're going to get moved on by the police if they're there. So they went from kind of thinking about their youth centre and started kind of realising that actually this greater outdoor space around them could be theirs, and that they could actually start kind of thinking about how they wanted to make change. So really quickly, the girls started realizing that the really practical, simple things that they wanted to kind of make change were that they wanted some shelter, they wanted some space that was well lit and felt safe at night, and they wanted somewhere where they could access Wi-Fi. These are pretty simple things that young people should kind of have access to, in my opinion. So they were like, yeah, we're going to make this happen. So they very quickly learned the kind of online designing tools of thinking about these blocks and how they wanted them to be structured. They were completely fearless. It was like, we thought it was kind of going to be a bigger process. They were like, no, this is what we want. This is how simple it is. Bish, bash, bosh. They did it. It was incredible. And the build of the blocks was just as successful. So the girls were using the tools for the first time in their lives. And the confidence was just amazing. They came together as a proper team. They owned this complete process, and they loved it. And they decided right at the end that they wanted to spray paint the blocks in like bright pinks and purples and blues, and they just took complete ownership of it. And it looked incredible. So we had to then move the blocks on wheels through the whole estate to get them into the place where they wanted to keep these blocks and have them installed permanently. And I was actually really worried at the time that the girls were going to be really self-conscious, kind of moving these blocks through the estate. Lots of people were going to see them. They were kind of nervous that maybe the project wasn't very cool to be getting involved with. These were my concerns. These were not their concerns. They took it full on. They were like, come on, we're going. Like, they were like leading the pack. We walked through the estate with these coloured blocks, and we got so much incredible attention. We had like loads of people in the community just like asking us questions, wanted to take pictures, and we got to the area on the high street where the girls wanted to have these blocks installed, and straight away, young people from all over the state were honestly, like, it was incredible, were just kind of running at these blocks, sitting on them, taking pictures, asking questions. And the young girls just took complete ownership, and they were like, yeah, we've just made these. Yeah, like, no big deal. This is paid work. Yeah, this is our accomplishment. And we got loads of photos, and there was like a moment where we had to take the blocks back to the centre where they'd been built. And we literally had young people like hanging on to them, like refusing to like let us leave, which just proved that the girls knew exactly what the community needed, and they did it.
If I could jump in just quickly, because and I invite the others as well, if you can testify to this too. But what I love what you're bringing up, and I think also resonates with the work that you're doing in Stoke as well, Claire, is creating that ownership and using that as an incentive for participation. And I wonder, with some of the others as well here on the panel, how you've used that, if you have, in terms of then thinking about scaling that going forward.
Yeah.
Anyone? Have I just thrown a back?
I can come in on that.
A spanner in that?
Well, it sort of covers a little bit
Yeah.
what I want to talk about anyway, which is it's sort of like having those peer networks, the importance of having the co-creators, the groups who have that ownership of the projects, right? For us as an organisation, obviously we work in arts and homelessness, and we had this training program which was co-produced, and because literally, and I spoke about this yesterday, when we went into lockdown, we suddenly had to rearrange and think about how to look at our training program, and know that we needed to replicate it and also change it to make it more of a hybrid model. And the challenge with us was, suddenly everyone was in lockdown, and so how do we go about this? So we decided to bring together several groups, and it was actually free because we had the peer network with this group, and then we had a peer network of cultural venues, which was the Tate, the South Bank, the Barbican, Castlefields in Manchester, Manchester Museum, the Herbert Gallery, and the Belgrade, and the Whitechapel Gallery. Remember them all. I think I've got them all. And that was a group that came together to see what was going wrong and to know what we could offer as an organisation to those venues for them to work better with the homeless communities. That was a challenge in itself, bringing those groups together. And then we also then had our co-creators with lived experience, who were based in Coventry, London, and Manchester. Bringing that group together and saying to them, this is the training that we've been doing for the past 2 years. What do you think of it? Where are we going wrong? What do you want to rip up about it? Where do you want to start again? And they ripped the whole lot up and decided that they wanted to rebuild this training program. Over the next few months, whilst having our monthly meetings here, we're also having monthly meetings with both peer groups, bringing them together. Hell of a lot of work, as you know, trying to bring all different groups together for the same time, etc. Especially with co-creators, like people with lived experience of homelessness, and some of our co-creators were still homeless. So trying to get them into a space that one they feel comfortable with, safe with, and have that ownership is quite difficult. But you persevere, and because of that, we then got the co-creators listening to the advice from the venues and what they needed and what the co-creators needed, and then they started to build a new training program for us. That training program then went off and we implemented one which we did a pay what you want event. We had, I think it was about 70 odd different people come to this online, and the whole thing was run by the co-creators. I was literally sat in the background crying my eyes out because I was so proud, right? Because actually two of the co-creators in the first couple of sessions didn't even want to talk, right? They didn't feel comfortable being on the screen, but they wanted to put their points of views through. And this was a massive success for us, right? Because from that, one of the venues wanted to then implement some of the things that we'd spoken about, right? We also had the National Theatre of Wales then book the co-creators, who were all fully paid throughout this whole process, to then run sessions with them, right? Which proves that these simple ideas of giving over this ownership, the recipe, as Andrew put it, right, to other people and letting them have full control in this has that I guess, sort of like a ricocheting effect to actually help spread your messages or straight from the horse's mouth as such, like, do you know what I mean? To add to that, right, and I've got so many badly written notes here, right, so I do apologise. But it was like this whole idea of how our training could then be adapted again, right? So we then decided to have quite a fluid training sessions, right? So if a venue came to us And every single venue, as you know, for people who run venues, every single venue is different, right? So we can't have a set training program created by co-creators. We had to have this fluidity to it. So then every person who then came to us, the information was then fed back to our co-creators, and our co-creators go, right, actually, this is what they need. So it wasn't even coming from any of us who were working for the organisation. It was the co-creators deciding what parts of the training was needed for them to go on. Like I was saying, the National Theatre of National Justice Museum in Nottingham have now taken this on board. They've now implemented a programme which was designed by our co-creators, which now has this knock-on effect for us because we're now launching a new programme which has come out of this whole thing. The important thing I really want to stress is the importance of having peer networks, right? I think you were speaking earlier on this morning saying you don't run the company, it's the team that runs it, right? And this is the importance of having a peer network or people that you can just come and talk to, right? And I mean, it is, a lot of time, it is just to talk to share ideas, to bounce ideas, to let off steam, to curse about the government, that a lot, especially within the cultural sector at the moment with what's happened, curse about funding, you know, et cetera, right? But by sharing this knowledge through different venues and and our co-creators, seeing the complexities of what the cultural sector is going through, it means that we have a little bit more in-depth knowledge as an organisation of how best we can help them help our communities. I think that for me is probably one of the things. One of the challenges, sorry, I'm very quickly, right? One of the challenges is around this is, yes, having these peer groups, fantastic. They're so important to help replicate your models and stuff like that. But it takes time, right? And time takes money. So you have to really invest into those networks to be able to then have that ripple effect across your organisations. Thank you.
It's like we planned it, but a great segue again with time, with Rising Arts, because I feel like that's been a point in your journey as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think to give a kind of... sorry, I'm also just going to be very upfront and say I had my flu jab yesterday and the brain fog is overwhelming, so if I don't make
She
any
committed,
sense.
guys, she committed.
Yeah, for us, it was just about really slowing down and making intentional a process that we were sort of on the precipice of doing anyway, but just wanted, yeah, like you said, it takes time, which takes money, the opportunity to just really be intentional and specific about what it was that we wanted to do, the intention, the outcome that we wanted to see, and the people that we wanted to work with. So to give an overview, so Rising Arts Agency has been around for about 5 years. We are an arts agency that's based in Bristol in the southwest, and we are a team of now all under the age of 30. So we recently had a director's transition where the director of the agency who founded it said that after 5 years, if the agency was in good shape, she would hand it over to some people under the age of 30. It was, she did. She is now in a consultancy role for the agency, but the team is now all young people, taking very much that like abundance model that is like, we cannot be all things to all people, so we are this one thing for young people, and we try and do it for as many young people as possible. But our skill set, because we speak to our own peers, is not what it's like to be an emerging artist when you're sort of 45, because we don't know what that's like. So we focus on our own thing, and we exist to kind of collaborate and lend our knowledge to people who know more things about other things that are outside of our skill set. So the project that we were commissioned to do was an extension of some earlier work and was called Our Culture, which was basically the product of us doing an assessment of what our gaps were and what we did not know about or what we were not knowledgeable enough about, which for us was working with deaf young people, disabled young people, working class young people, and people with lived experience of seeking asylum or being refugees. And I've forgotten what the end of my sentence was going to be. The brain fog is absolutely...
You're doing good, you're doing good.
So it was going like, we know that we have done some things in some of these areas, but we do not know everything about what it is to live those experiences and to live those lives, and also to acknowledge that in order to be as many things to as many people as possible, we need to just give money to people who know more than us and give them ownership of our work and let them run in the direction that they want to run in. And so we wanted to very, very slowly and intentionally build relationships with young people who were on the periphery of our creative community. We have a community of young artists that are based in Bristol. And there were people who were asking for more support with these lived experiences that they were holding within themselves, and wanted us to get better at being those things. And I want to be very clear that we're a non-hierarchical organization. I am just one arm of a team of a lot of people, and I am the person that is here because I'm the person that did not need to be in other meetings, so that's why I'm the person speaking to you about this today. Yeah, and so it was for each of those, so for a representative from our community who could speak to one of those experiences, so Dave, Kieran, Osei, and Red8, to gather a group of young people with the shared lived experience that they had, to, over the course of several months, meet up regularly, to build relationships, begin to strategize, and then to begin to plan actions that were relevant to them and their communities. So the outcomes, it wasn't outcome driven, it was more like build a relationship, build a group, we'll have a winter party, and then we'll talk about getting you some money to do the thing that you want to do next. But the ideas that we've got now are that one group wants to throw a festival of disability, where it's all workshops, shows, performances, various other things. One group wants to run a survey for more deaf and hard of hearing young people to find out more about what their peers that are like them want from the arts. The group of working class young people wants to develop more working strategies for recruiting from people who identify as underclass, criminal class, or working class backgrounds. And the group that Parang is a part of has been focusing on making some animated films, because they're led by Red8 Abena, who's an incredible animator. And yeah, there's a huge variety and a huge amount of stuff that we have got very wrong in this process, like the amount of time things would take, and just being quite naive in our assumptions being correct, and really having to challenge ourselves on what we think is a good idea and why we think that's a good idea, and acknowledging that, like, while there's like neurodiversity and the experience of being working class, et cetera, within our team, those experiences are not the same, obviously, for everybody. And so just really having to check ourselves constantly and being wrong all the time, and just persistently butting up against that, and just having to, I'm sure everybody here knows this, but like just constantly humble yourself and just be like, shut up. You don't know more than everybody else. So in the interest of modeling shutting up, I would like to invite Parang to introduce yourself and your experience of doing our culture, and who you are as a person. Over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Parang. I'm a filmmaker from Iran, and I studied directing and dramaturgy from Tehran University. I was making more art house and documentary films, and I had to become refugee due to my filmmaking, and I was lived in the UK since 2015. I am based in Leicester, and since 2015, after coming to the UK, my life was very unstable, up and down. Journey to the UK was with a lot of traumas, asylum-seeking process, refugeeism, and but good thing is I've been involved with different art communities, and they led me back to establishing myself as an artist in the UK, and now I am currently working on making my short film, which been founded by BFI, which called Floating Pomegranate. Experience with raising art agency has been generally very, very good, and they were very organized and thoughtful for needs of the time and needs of the participants. They were very friendly and inclusive opportunity, and they allowed me to share my experience with everyone and give me a purpose to asking and challenging questions and working toward the goal of small stop motion animation, and something which I never made before, but I have always been very inspired by. And then after that, they put me in touch with other organizations like Place of War, which I am currently underdoing a residency program with them, and I learned about activism and how to be more political and having political messages into my art and and be inspired and challenge things. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Hopefully, in essence, these are quite intangible things that we're talking about in terms of how you embed that in some form of product or service, or something that can then be later on shared with others. But certainly, and I won't put words in anyone's mouths here, but I think what was safe to say is that the time and space that was created for the cohort to really think about those pieces, and as we said, it's an ongoing process, but hopefully demonstrates some of the thinking that had gone through. I'm just checking the time, and I think we've got about 10 minutes or so, but this is the time where we invite any questions from the floor to any members of our panel who are up here. I'll let Sarah. Have you got a mic or not? Still one. But yes, if we'll take any questions from anyone, if there are any.
I've got a question to the floor, actually, which is, when we started this piece of work, there was an assumption. I think a lot of people have spoken about how they wanted to grow and replicate their work. But I wonder, with the last 18 months, some of the conversations I've had with arts organisations is that there is no longer the capacity to grow and replicate your work. And you might have this, I'm going to use the Lowry again, this fantastic piece of work, young carers, but everyone, the industry has lost a lot of people, and I wonder if anyone's got any thoughts around that. I think there's amazing pieces of work here, and it's always been said it's about funding. Often funding is used as well, we can't do it because we haven't got the funding. But I wonder, after the last 18 months, whether people feel that there is there's a capacity issue. You might have an amazing piece of work, but it's not the funding, you just haven't got the capacity. Else?
Thanks. I think we need to change the ask of funders. We do need more time, and that does take more money, so we need to change the ask. And I think the thing about capacity is that if we know you share stuff and everyone gets better, we can bypass some of the really hard graft that you might have done setting up your project, or Rising you've done setting up your project, or Striker Light, looking into recruitment processes. If we're open with all that stuff and we share it, give a nod to the people who've lent it to you, but run with that. I think that can really help with the capacity issue. But yeah, let's change the ask of funders, because I think they do want to listen. I think we need to try and find some imaginative ways of helping them understand how these processes will really change the work that we do.
I wonder if I can just add something, which is I definitely think that in terms of capacity, we're a very young team, and everyone the last 18 months has been very, very difficult. We're also all part-time, and everyone has really, really, really struggled in our team over the last however long, and it's hit our community and our community of artists in very different and specific ways. And so a lot of what our intentions are looking like now are kind of going back and shoring up the work that we've done so that it can live in a more evergreen way, and where we've done things in the past that were not as accessible as we wanted them to be, or were not, there were things that we just were not thinking about before, going back and sort of shoring those things up, so that when we step forwards, when we have the mental capacity, when we have the physical capacity and the financial capacity to take that step forwards, we are exactly where we need to be in terms of making sure that everybody is as welcome and as included as possible, and not that we are shooting off in this one branch in one direction and going, we'll sort out all of the rest of it, which is sort of what was having to happen with funding on a project basis, where we were having to go, well, we'll do this and then we'll sort it out later, is going from a baseline have we got everything up to this point of accessibility and inclusion and like caretaking, and we've been, you know, trying to pay our community to rest as much as possible. So like giving out pots of money to go, here's £150, please don't do anything for the next 8 hours. Just like get yourself a takeaway and go to bed. And just trying to do more of that rather than like loads of sort of fireworks and, I don't know, jazz hands and all that kind of stuff.
That's brilliant.
I think that's really important as well, like, you know, because obviously we've all just been through a pandemic. Huge amounts of people in the cultural sector have like lost their jobs and opportunities and stuff like this. I think this is why when we sort of put together our co-creators team, was this importance of them having that ownership of what they wanted out of this. You know, from day one, we were saying like we need to evaluate this at some point. How do you want to evaluate it? How do you want to, you know, do you want to do a diary? Do you want to do a video diary, etc., etc.? But then we also then wanted to give them the ownership of all that training, you know, because it's their knowledge, it's their skills, and it's their ideas. So then they are the ones that then take over and actually go out and help do the training. Because we know that homeless people have difficulty getting into venues, right? You know, I spoke about this yesterday. You know, the front doors are always a massive barrier for the homeless community. So if we can actually get homeless people, or ex-homeless people who are going in and actually providing the training to these venues, it hopefully will start to break down those barriers, which then, but also it helps us as an organisation with our capacity, you know, because we're only a small team. There's only four or five of us, I can't even remember that, 4 of us. We can't go to every cultural venue across the UK to train staff. We physically can't do that. But by building this team and actually having this model which can, you know, change, you know, you know, it's like a recipe, as you said, like, you know, you stick a Mars bar in it, it's going to be a completely different recipe. And that's the thing with like having this training. Homelessness is different across the country. Every single city you go to, there's a different issue around homelessness. So they have the opportunity to provide training specifically for their cities, their towns, etc., to go on. But it's about giving that ownership and responsibility, and then that hopefully will help our capacity. I think, like, you know, thinking about capacity and training and cost and stuff like that, if we can just start to look at, you know, if you could take money out of the equation, right, and if you could take capacity out of the equation and had that blue sky way of thinking and go, right, what is it that will actually have a massive impact within our sector or our organisations, and focus on that, and then hopefully the rest will just slot into place. And that's what we've done as a community in the homeless arts community. We sort of forgot about the money, forgot about the capacity, and went, right, that's the problem we've got. How can we address that? And the best way of addressing it is with people who are the ones who are being, you know, affected by it. So.
Any others? Questions, comments? Got one over here.
This is a question for Claire. I was just really interested in like taking a creative process methodology in terms of like making a production, and then making something bigger than that, like a building, and just to tell us a bit more about how you did that and how that worked, and which bits of the creative process kind of fitted really neatly into the new way of, or for the new thing you were building, and bits that kind of maybe didn't work so well.
Yeah, of course. Well, what I can say is that, like everyone said, time, everything probably just takes like years, a lot more time. So our process of making a show is normally about 18 months to a year. And for some reason, we thought that we could maybe get through halfway through that process in the first year, whilst also restoring an old building, and that we would also get through our co-creative process with people. So I think the main learning for us has been, it's slow. It's like the first year is about building trust, is about really just keeping the door open, is having those conversations while you're painting a wall, is meeting people, being there. And that might be the first year, which, you know, we might in a show capacity do like in 2 months, all that like beating, trust building, super quick, singing and dancing together. But this project is like, we've just had to be there and keep the doors open. So basically, I'd say in terms of replicating our methodology, we are like at the very beginning. So we definitely can't comment yet on how successful that's been, but what has been really successful has been like totally dismantling and unpicking what we already do and going, what are the structures around the work that we make and how can we apply that? And here's what we think might happen. But we definitely are not up to commenting yet on how successful it's been. So yeah, time.
Do we have any more? I think we've got maybe about 3-4 minutes left. Any questions, comments, even from our panel? Any final words? I guess, like, if I may, like a recommendation or a key piece of learning that you all had when taking part in the programme, what would you share?
I'll just say one thing, because me and Nick, before this session, were talking a lot, and sort of other people have, of the messiness. So, like, I think we all agree that, like, co-creation is messy and unwieldy, and it feels like what we've tried to do this year, I know in our commission, is try and distill something that's very messy and try and contain it into something that can then be replicated, but that feels quite a disconnect between what it actually, the beast that co-creation is. So I think, just that acknowledgement that it's messy, and what I really enjoyed about being part of this cohort is a place to share the kind of messiness and go, oh yeah, we're all kind of struggling, we're all questioning everything we're doing and why we're doing it and who it's for and whether we're the right people to do it. And so it's kind of like we're trying to just contain the messiness and create some values and ethics that underpin it safely so that it could be replicated or grown, but it's messy.
Yeah, I think also for me it's been a lot about realizing that like so much has to go inwards before it's even close to being ready to be shared. Like when I was trying to work out what was important and interesting to share today, and I don't know if I've pulled out any interesting things at all, but that actually, like, because we are still in it and we are like gearing towards the 7th of December, where we're going to try and get everyone together for like a screening of the films that these guys have made, and to eat dinner together and to get really excited about the future, and because everyone wants to meet each other because they've been in 4 separate groups, because that hasn't even happened yet. And while I've been making loads of notes, and Jess, who was overseeing the project, has been making loads of notes, and everyone's been thinking about how we're going to evaluate it, like it doesn't exist yet because it's not even kind of done. And I think that like then trying to distill like learning is like, oh, this feels important, but like it's still too close. And so like, it feels very like Art Attack, like he's putting buckets down and like a big bit of fabric, and then in a minute the camera will do this and you go, oh my god, it's a frog. But like at the moment it's still like buckets and fabric and like some paint, and you're like, what's Neil gonna do next? Like it feels very chaotic and zoomed in, and that's quite exciting, but also means that like maybe my presence on this panel is sort of functionally useless beyond going, oh, I don't know. I don't know if that's useful.
Shall we be memorable?
It's the flu jab, guys.
I think we've got just a question at the bottom here, actually.
I just think it's really nice when you've all spoken about ownership. I think as a co-creator, when I run projects with the people, it's really nice to give back to them, but go back into the community and see what they exactly want. And being a face that they recognize makes such a big difference. But the ownership bit, I feel like in the past, projects have been run and okay, we've done that. But the fact that these women or children or whoever it is then get to celebrate and show off what they actually have achieved with family, friends, and people in the community really gives them that, that sense of achievement, which I think as co-creatives we are now giving back to the community. So, I think it's amazing what you lot are doing, so thank you.
I would like to add to that. I think you're right. I think it is about ownership, but I think it's about also the community actually receiving the funds for that ownership as well. It shouldn't be like organisations taking all the credit and the money and stuff like that. So the wealth of that ownership has to go back to the community as well, which I think, and I just wanted to add what I learned through this was to trust the community that you're working with, to trust that they know best, and obviously I'm from that community myself, and there was still stuff that I didn't know and I was still learning. So I think I probably learnt more than what my co-creating team learnt. And so, yeah. And then one last thing, it's okay to feel shit, right? Because there was times where things were just going wrong, and it was, you felt like you were headbutting the wall at times, and you were just like, oh my God, like, but that's okay. That's all part of it, isn't it? So yeah.
Thank you very much to everyone for listening and to our panellists. I know we're running over time ever so slightly, so just a last kind of final thank you to the Battersea Arts Centre team, to Coolidge Gulbenkian as well for funding the project. Absolute pleasure working with these guys over the last few months as well. Do check out more of the work that they're doing. If you'd like to know more about the Young Foundation as well, you can visit our website at youngfoundation.org. My details are on the screen there as well if you'd like to keep in touch or ask any more questions. But other than that, thank you so much for having us.